Good morning, everyone. This is Representative Anna Villascamani. Thank you so much for joining us on this very important conversation focused on navigating eviction and ways to also access rental assistance here in Orange County. For those who do not know, my name is Anna Escamani. I'm the state representative now for District 42 and was just reelected not even a month ago. So I'm very excited to continue to be in a place of service. Before we get started, we want folks to get comfortable both on the Facebook chat and for those in the Zoom room. Please get yourself situated. This is going to be a really impactful and informative conversation. And because we care about accessibility, we are offering total caption services. And so I want to give a big thank you to our total caption team for providing this service to us. And so for those who need closed captioning, we have it in English and Spanish, and you can access that at bit.ly/Anna_captions. And I'll spell that out in case folks need it in a different way. It is bit.ly, so bit.ly/ANNA, that's my first name, Anna_captions, CAPTIONS. And the A and the C are capitalized, which does matter. So again, in order to access our English and Spanish captions, you can do so by going to bit.ly/Anna_captions. And big thank you to Lisa of Total Captions for providing this service to us today. And I will do my best to also slow down my pace of speech because I know I'm a fast talker, but in order for our caption services to work, I will do my part. And so thank you again, Lisa, for being here. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. We are joined here today by Michael Resnick from Legal Aid. We know that tomorrow will be December 1st, and rent will be due for many, many Central Floridians and people across the state. We also know that folks are struggling economically right now. Our legislative office is experiencing it to a huge degree in seeing not only phone calls come in about eviction, but getting emails about eviction, getting emails about utility needs and assistance. We have folks who are experiencing a huge cost in their property insurance, which is thus impacting their home ownership. And of course, just the cost of food and other types of essentials. Things are really, really difficult right now. And as many of us try to get into the holiday spirit, we also know that it's not possible for many families because they're just trying to figure out how to survive. With that said, at Team Anna, we've been working hard to meet this need, but we also know that it's important for folks to know their rights. It's important for folks to know what to do if they find themselves in a difficult economic situation. And we have some amazing partners to help us navigate those situations. And just to give some more context, across the nation, renters are seeing an increase of about 14%, which is more than half the rate of inflation. And we know in Florida, it's even worse. And data from the University of Florida and the Clerk of Courts have shown the number of eviction filings has gone up at an average of 119% in Central Florida. And in Orange County, nearly 9,800 evictions have been filed since the beginning of this year, which is about 40 a day. And it has absolutely surged past those pre-pandemic levels. So with all that being said, we're here to talk about the realities that folks are facing in these situations. We also want to make sure that you know what an eviction process entails, so you find the resources to protect yourself. And we also want to really encourage early activation around this because candidly, if you know you're going to fall behind in rent, whether it's job loss, whether it's rent going up and you can't afford it, whether it's some sort of medical emergency or new expenses came up that month, we really want to encourage you to plan ahead, because if we can hear about that situation in advance, it gives us more time to find a solution, gives you more time to find a solution versus allow the eviction notice to get posted and take no action on it. And so that's why we're really excited to have the expertise of Michael with us today. So originally from New Jersey, Mike went to law school in Ohio and moved to Florida in 1989. Mike has worked for the Legal Aid Society in Orlando for more than 22 years, first as the office's consumer attorney, and then as the office's housing attorney. Interesting note, Mike is actually retired from Legal Aid Society in 2018, so he could pursue his dream of traveling around the United States in his RV. However, in 2020, Mike came out of retirement to assist Legal Aid Society with the housing crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so Mike is actually joining us from the road in his RV. I'm really excited and grateful that you've made the time to do that. And so as we go into our structured Q&A, I want to also invite everyone to submit your questions. If you're on Zoom, I'm looking at the Zoom box. If you're on Facebook, we're watching the Facebook chat. So don't be shy to ask questions. I will say that if questions are very, very specific, it might be more appropriate for you to contact your local legal aid, and we can provide you that information as well. But any question, is a valued question, so don't be shy to ask it. But just know that due to client attorney privileges at times, sometimes questions require a one-on-one consultation versus a virtual setting. So with that said, Mike, welcome. I would love for you to take a few minutes to introduce yourself a little more and tell us about your experience, and also, what have you been seeing on the ground when it comes to folks navigating the housing crisis right now?
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here from my RV in Virginia. It's raining outside right now. I don't know what it's doing in Florida, but I have been an attorney at Legal Aid for more than 22 years. I practiced law for 35. I've done a lot of different things in my career, and so I think that makes my job at Legal Aid a little bit easier because I have a lot of experience and knowledge. And the history of the housing goes back for 2 decades or more. So but we are having an unusual housing crisis, I think, here in Central Florida now. We've got extremely high rents. We have extremely high rent increases, and we have a lack of availability of housing because I think we have so many people that are moving here into Central Florida. And so all of these things are making it incredibly difficult for renters. The new housing statistics, by the way, are 13,000 as of October 31st. I think we're going up at a clip of about 1,500 a month. So we're probably going to get to 16,000 cases by the end of this year, which is just shocking. It's utterly shocking, and it's obviously negatively impacting our community and the families that live here in the community. So our hope at Legal Aid, and certainly through the representative office, is to try to help folks navigate through this as best we can. But we have the Florida law to deal with. We have some local laws here in Orange County that may help us, but it's a pretty difficult thing. So I do encourage everyone, as soon as you get a hint that you're going to have a problem, contact a social service organization, Orange County, their representative's office, my office at Legal Aid, so we can at least give you an idea, a roadmap of how things are going to happen and where you might be able to get some assistance. Don't wait till the end. I get folks that come to my office the day before something has to happen, and we're just not able to accommodate and help someone. So I'm here to help out and answer questions. Thank
you, Mike. And that's just such a good piece of advice. I think a lot of folks sometimes feel helpless when they get that eviction notice, especially if they've never navigated it before. So they do wait till the last minute because they're hoping maybe it's a mistake or something will change. And I just want to echo that advice of, if you're looking at your budget and you feel like there's pressure points, and no matter how hard you're trying to make money, I mean, we have folks who contact us while they're doing Uber, making extra money on the side. I mean, the reality is that rent is going up in a huge degree, and it's putting folks in difficult situations. But if you're proactive, we can have a better access to resources to support you. And with that said, I know that in our office, we've been navigating a lot of our Florida applications alongside local emergency rental assistance programs. And so I'm curious, we've seen some success in those programs, but also a lot of delays and situations where folks have already applied for ERAP or Our Florida, but they're waiting and waiting, or the check gets mailed to the wrong address and things like that. I'm just curious, how does that intersect with your work? Will legal aid try to refer folks to different government assistance programs, or can you file, with a court saying that this tenant is currently applying, and does that buy someone more time? Maybe just kind of walk us through the intersection of rental assistance programs with what actually takes place if you are facing an eviction.
Well, that's a great question. And so it's a very difficult one. So the rent assistance programs that we have in Florida, the Orange County rent assistance programs, they're all great programs. I mean, they are money from the federal government that flows down to, the citizens here in Orange County. The problem is it's difficult to, process applications, to disperse the money. Most of the programs require the landlord to cooperate because there's information that the landlord has to provide. And Florida law doesn't require the landlord to cooperate. So it's kind of odd. We would think that if there's money available, why wouldn't the landlord cooperate? But they're not legally required to cooperate. And what's important is that the judge is prohibited from forcing the landlord to cooperate or accept rent money. So we have a pot of money that's available. It takes time to be dispersed. Sometimes there are errors, just like in any other thing that we do in life. There's processing errors or application errors. Even when the money is approved, it doesn't mean that your landlord's going to accept it. And if your landlord says, you know what, we've waited too long, it's been too long, we're not going to wait any longer, the judge is prohibited by law from forcing a landlord to accept the rent money. So we have a terrible problem here. We have money that may be coming, a pipeline of money, but unfortunately, some landlords won't wait to accept it. I've had clients that have been waiting since July. It's been approved since July, but they still haven't received the money. I had a couple of clients where the checks were made out to an old landlord, not the current landlord. It takes these agencies a long time to correct that. And so the disconnect is that, or the problem is that a court case can continue and will be completed, even though there's all of this money that might be available and has been approved for that particular tenant. So my job's a difficult one because I have to give them the bad news that even though you've applied, it's not going to stop your eviction. Even though it's been approved, it's not going to stop the eviction. The only time it will stop an eviction is if the landlord cashes those checks. That means the landlord's accepted the money, and then the law will generally prohibit the eviction. So very difficult.
Yeah. It's also a very good reminder of just the role that state government plays in the housing experience and in the eviction process, because I want folks to remember that every state is different in this regard. And even depending on the state, counties or cities could operate differently too. Now in Florida, a lot of what a local government can do is preempted. And I'm sure folks who are in Orange County are watching the litigation happening right now over the rent stabilization ordinance. And to provide quick context for folks who are not in Orange County, our commissioners, after 2 years of advocacy from tenants' rights organizations, put before the voters an ordinance, a referendum rather, to basically try to limit rent increases up to about 10% CPI for a year, with exceptions and with a way for landlords to also, file to increase greater based on their costs. Long story short, though that passed, it's now still being litigated in court, and it was never applicable. And so even though voters approved it, because of the Florida Apartment Association and the Florida Realtors, it's not currently in place. And it's just one of those examples of how state law also impacts even what local options we have. And sometimes a chief judge can put into place different types of protections, or maybe integration of a rental assistance advocate in the courtroom to at least make sure the tenant has applied for all their options. But candidly, because of the nature of preemption in the state, tenants really don't have an even playing field when it comes to, like you said, Mike, even if you secure rental assistance dollars, the landlord does not have to accept it. They can discriminate against you and not accept it.
Right.
And, obviously that's incredibly heartbreaking because that tenant is trying to take the steps to avoid an eviction. And we all know that an eviction on your record is devastating in the long-term housing experience. Once you have an eviction on your record, it can be very hard to find someone else to rent to you.
That is correct. And your point is a good one. I get a lot of clients that are surprised at the law and they're like, well, that's not the way it is in New York. And I'm like, well, that's right. In the Northeast, there are a lot more tenant protections than we have down here in Florida. And so we have to focus on Florida law. And we're not saying that it's right because we have a different view of how these things should happen. But we do have to follow the law. And that's kind of my job, is to hopefully folks don't think that I'm a mean guy. I'm just telling them what the law is, and I'm giving them a chance or an idea about how to navigate through some of it. But it's still about Florida law, and it's still about the payment or the non-payment of rent.
Yeah. No, 100%. Well said. We've experienced the same thing with folks that are, especially even just the rent increases, asking us, how is this legal? How is it legal for my rent to go up, 20, 30%? And the reality is there's nothing to make it illegal, just because I always have to remind folks that like something that might feel unethical doesn't mean it's illegal in Florida. And so at the end of the day, it's the reality of the current statute.
Yeah, we have no rent control. I mean, we're trying to do it in Orange County. And as you said, look what happened. The voters approved it. But then the courts have put it on hold. So it'll be litigated probably all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court now.
Totally. Which, is much more conservative. So we'll see what happens.
Correct.
So with that said, I want to, if possible, walk through for folks what happens when an eviction gets filed, and what are the required timelines and responses? Because I think part of the other issue we've seen is we'll get a phone call from a constituent who says, I'm being evicted. And we're like, okay, what does that mean? Is it a 3-day notice? Is it a 5-day notice? Like, did the landlord give you any notice? Because we also have situations where landlords change the locks on you and now you're evicted. And it's like, no, they actually can't just do that. There has to be a process. So can we walk through what that process is so that our listeners and viewers at least know for themselves and for their neighbors, like, what are your rights and what is that procedure that must take place before the eviction's actually final?
All right. So we have 3 hours to go? All righty. So we'll just talk more about like non-payment of rent. There are different kinds of evictions. You can have a lease violation. You have a dog and you shouldn't have, or an unauthorized guest. But that's not normally the case. What you normally have is a non-payment of rent. So the way the eviction process starts is your landlord gives you a written notice, a 3-day notice. Dear tenant, you haven't paid your rent in the amount of whatever. And if you don't pay your rent within 3 days, then you either have to move or you have to, or you're going to have an eviction court case filed against you. Now, a lot of my clients think that 3-day notice comes from the court. It does not. It comes directly from the landlord. There is a form that landlords can use that's in the statute, but there isn't going to be a court seal on it. It doesn't have to be given to you by the sheriff or a process server. It's just mailed to you, handed to you, taped to your door. And it just says, if you don't pay within 3 days, then we're going to file an eviction action against you. So you have to pay within the 3-day deadline. If you don't, the interesting part about the law is even if you become a millionaire a week later, your landlord's not required to accept your rent. Your only guaranteed time to accept the money and stop an eviction is during that 3-day time period. So pay during that period of time, and that means borrowing the money from family or friends if you can. If you don't pay within the deadline, the landlord then walks down to the courthouse and files an eviction court case against you. Pretty simple to do. The court papers are available for the landlord, so it's not very difficult. You'll be served with the eviction court papers. You'll get them either taped to your door or hand delivered by a process server or the sheriff. So whenever they're taped to the door or hand delivered to you, that means you've been served. And then you have 5 business days to file a written response to the eviction with the Orange County Clerk of the Court. The written response is your reason why you don't believe that you should be evicted. And so most people put down, I lost my job because of COVID, or there's been a family emergency, something traumatic, and that's fine. There's a problem though, I call it a problem in the law. When you file your written response, you must also deposit your unpaid rent money into the court registry at the same time. So everyone says to me, well, how do I do that? Of course I don't have the rent money. That's what started this whole thing. And that's right. The legislature knows that. The legislature knows that you have a story. That's your answer. That's the reason why you're filing a written response. You're going to tell your story. But the legislature has decided that the story's not enough, that you have to pay your rent money into the court registry. And if you don't do that, then the law requires that your landlord be able to obtain a final judgment in a 24-hour eviction order. So even though we have a court process and you're going to be able to respond and tell the judge why you didn't pay, you've got to pay your rent money. And if you don't, the judge is required to issue a final judgment, which then allows your landlord to obtain what we call a writ of possession. And that's a 24-hour eviction order. And what that means is the sheriff comes out, hands you this 24-hour eviction order, and the sheriff comes back in 24 hours. And if you're still there, your landlord will be able to remove you, the sheriff will remove you, and then your landlord can change the locks, and your property can be thrown out to the street.
Right.
So that's the process.
Yeah. And candidly, we've when we do our community outreach and we specifically target the zip codes that have high eviction rates, it's really, really hard to see, but the post eviction furniture, if you will, is on the side, on the sidewalk, on the driveway.
That's right. When you see a pile of stuff on the street, it means that someone's been evicted. A lot of people ask me, how long can the eviction process take? If a landlord knows what they're doing, and a lot do, it can be done in 10 to 14 days.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think, oh, I've got a couple of months. No, that means you must live in New York. Unfortunately, that's not how it works here in Florida. So evictions are very quick. And unless you have the money, there's very little that can be done in order to interfere with the flow of an eviction court process.
And just to add to that point too, of the public storage challenge as well, because we've had folks that, just the ability to even afford a storage unit to at least put their furniture in is close to impossible. I mean, that's become more expensive too.
Yes.
And then the pay to play structure that you just described, we've actually filed legislation in the past to eliminate that process, because it really does set uneven playing field, because as you noted, does not allow the tenant to even share their story, which could be tied to medical issues. It could be tied to really things beyond that person's control. And it's just unfortunate that they don't even get a chance to really defend themselves in a court of law.
Well, and I think that's a great point. So I think it's really important to understand that once an eviction court case is filed, the second it's filed, it remains a permanent court record. It cannot be sealed. It cannot be expunged for any reason whatsoever. Even if you paid all the money that you owed your landlord, your eviction would still be a permanent public record. And anyone can simply put your name into the clerk of the court's records, or there are professional services that will do this. And a new landlord, apartment complex most likely, or anyone with a realtor or a management company, they won't rent to you, probably for 3 to 5 years. It doesn't matter why you didn't pay. So Eviction court, the second it's filed, it can never be removed. Even if you win your case, by the way, and that would be rare, it will never be removed. It'll just show
Right.
that you won your case. So if you can avoid the filing of an eviction court action, I would strongly suggest that you try to find a way to avoid it, because it will make you very upset. I recently had a client and she wanted to talk to the judge about her case. If she had a case, she didn't have one yet. And I said to her, I'm not so sure you want to talk to a judge about your case, because the law dictates what the judge is required to do. And I said, you're going to be so angry if that case is filed. So I suggest that she had the money to pay rent, by the way, she just didn't want to. And so I'm like, look, I'd really like you to pay your rent, because I don't want you to be involved in an eviction court case, because it can never go away.
Yeah, 100%.
So-
And we actually tried in a bipartisan fashion to pass legislation to allow for there to be expungement if it was COVID related.
Correct.
And even that could not pass the Florida Senate. And so
not in Florida, unfortunately, not in Florida. A lot of other states have, and that was our hope, was to get Florida to follow along.
Yeah.
Not even for COVID. So
I mean, I remember, after the 08-09 recession with foreclosures in particular, there was a lot of, actions taken by Congress to provide some sense of empathy, if you will, letting lenders know that, this person experienced an economic challenge in 08-09. It was somewhat, out of their control. And yet we were unable to secure that type of empathy at all for COVID in Florida. So yeah, it's a very uneven playing field.
Yeah, it's very sad. Very sad.
I just want to uplift a comment by Jay in the Zoom chat, kind of to this point. The problem that tenants face is that the law in Florida generally favors landlords. My practice area includes property rights and land use, including areas like inclusionary zoning. From my perspective, is highly unlikely that state or federal laws would be constitutional if they interfere with a landlord's property or contractual rights. So just appreciate that legal perspective, Jay.
And I agree. That's what we're facing in Florida, is that I don't think we're going to be able to significantly alter the playing field. So I agree with that.
Totally.
You wanted, I think you made a comment about what landlords can't do.
Please. Yeah, I would like to just do that review so folks know.
Yeah. So there are some things that are prohibited by Florida law. So a landlord cannot turn off utilities without a court order. So what that really means is, at the end of an eviction, when the eviction is approved by the judge and you're evicted, obviously utilities can be turned off and all of that stuff. But while you're still there and without an order, so no order from a court, a landlord can't turn off the electric, the sewer, some of the other utilities. Landlords can't change the locks or do anything like that to inhibit your access to the property. If your landlord does do that, then you do have a right to file a lawsuit against your landlord. You can obtain an injunction or a court order that requires the restoration of utilities or access to the property. And then you do, as a tenant, have the right to sue the landlord for an amount of money equal to 3 times the amount of your monthly rent. That's the penalty for the landlord, changing your locks or turning off your utilities. If those things do happen, please call legal aid right away. We do provide some significant legal assistance in that area. We will attempt to get your utilities or access restored. If not, we will file a lawsuit on your behalf to obtain an injunction, and then to get money damages to penalize or punish the landlord for acting improperly. But there are a lot of things, there's a lot of tension that goes on out there, that's for sure, between landlords and tenants. But there are certain things that are prohibited by law. So if those things do happen, please call legal aid and we'll try to help you out.
Thank you for that great walkthrough of folks just kind of knowing, to some degree what their rights are. I want to expand upon this with a few additional questions. We have seen a lot of emails come in, especially post Hurricane Ian, about mold forming, in their apartment, and the landlord not doing anything about it. Can you speak to, not necessarily eviction, but just the responsibilities of a landlord to upkeep the property? Because a lot of folks have asked us, isn't this their job? Why is the landlord not addressing these quality of life issues with the property? Could you speak a little more to just what are their basic responsibilities in maintaining the property and ensuring that it's livable in Florida?
That is a complex question. So landlords have an obligation to maintain the property, whether it's by statute, by local ordinance, pursuant to a lease if you have it. But to be quite frank, the reality of the world, and this is where the law and the real world just kind of disconnect and go in different directions. Yeah, so landlord's violating the obligation to maintain the property. How do you get it fixed? You email to the landlord of death over a month or two and nothing happens. So now you're faced with what? Filing a lawsuit against your landlord. To be quite frank, the reality of that is that when a landlord gets sued, most people, we're all human beings, right? And so when somebody gets sued, are they happy? Or are they angry? They're mad, right? And so then they start to be, quite honestly, retaliate in some ways. They find a way to maybe evict you when they weren't going to do that before. And there are many ways that people can make up stories about an event. I saw you with someone who was doing drugs, for example. Well, there was nobody doing drugs in my house. We know that, but your landlord said you were. And so they find different ways to evict you. So I think it's a profound problem solving these kind of maintenance problems or mold. You can call code enforcement, okay? But when code comes out and issues a report, let's say there are housing code violations. The code enforcement report says, Mr. Landlord, if you don't fix within 30 days, we're going to fine you $1,000 a day. Is that a happy letter for the landlord? No, that is not a happy landlord. And so landlords often retaliate. And one of the ways that I'm seeing right now because of the hurricane is landlords are saying, you know what, you're right. This place is a terrible place. We don't want you to live there. And they give you a 7-day notice that terminates your right to stay there. You have to move in 7 days. So we have a profound problem. It's not going to get fixed anytime soon. Our community is in crisis with the hurricane, with everything else that's going on. When there are hurricanes, there are insurance issues, right? Insurance claims take forever. And so none of these things are going to get fixed anytime soon. And I have seen a lot of landlords lately who just say, you know what, you're right. It's terrible. And we're going to ask you to leave. And then if you don't leave, you get an eviction action filed against you through no fault of your own.
Right.
So I don't have a good answer. There are things you can do, but they're months in the making. And by then you'll probably no longer be living there. So I would say be very cautious about what it is that you do if you're a tenant. That's why you would call the Legal Aid Society or another attorney who can give you some guidance on what's the best strategy, because what we think is the normal and best strategy is probably not the strategy we should take in this situation.
Right.
It's very scary, very frustrating. And that's where my clients get mad at me. They're like, you're telling me there's nothing we can do? And I'm like, no, we can do things, but they're months down the road. And I care about what's going to happen to you right now because you need housing. What happens if you're right and your place is terrible? Well, doesn't the landlord have to move me to another unit? No. Doesn't the landlord have to compensate me? No. All the landlord will do is tell you you need to leave. So I'd like to talk to people before they take action to give them a better sense of what the proper strategy is. So great question and a horrible answer because I don't think there are good answers.
But it's important for us to know the reality of the situation, right? And I will say that for folks who contact us, especially if it's in our district, we're pretty candid about calling the landlord or calling the property management company and trying to maintain a sense of anonymity to the person who called us, but just kind of expressing, with the person's consent that we, heard about this. Can you double check for us? And sometimes a lawmaker calling can be helpful. So I do want folks to definitely consider, calling your elected official, because sometimes we can take action while avoiding a real retaliatory response. And so, yeah.
I agree. And if I can add just one thing, it's kind of weird, but I like be nice. And I don't mean be nice to your landlord. I know that you are frustrated and upset and angry, but that's your best hope for solving a problem is your landlord. It's not the law. It's not the representative's office, because there's only certain things we can do, right? And so as much as we are frustrated, try to keep a good connection, a line of communication with your landlord. Don't be angry, because in the end, under Florida law, it's your landlord that can help you if your landlord wants to. They don't have to, but if they want to. So get on your manager's good side. Don't be screaming and yelling and all of that stuff. That's just a little bit of real world help, in my opinion.
Well, to your point, Mike, Lou, who's one of our constituents and a community advocate, and he's also a realtor, so he has a lot of good experience in this field. He shares, while it won't always help, discussing with the landlord ASAP why you can't pay rent can be helpful. Some landlords will agree to partial rent for a short period, especially if there's a promise to pay the rest in the next few months. So want to just amplify
that's how you do it. You try the best you can. You explain the circumstances. A lot of my clients get upset and angry and yell and scream, and I don't think that's ever productive. And I think at some point the recipient of that then just shuts down and says, you know what, we're not even going to think about helping anymore.
Right. No, I appreciate that reminder.
Yeah.
Along the same degree of what your contractual rights are, there are also cases, and you kind of mentioned this in passing, where you don't have a lease, where you're paying month by month. I mean, I personally don't recommend that to folks. I think if you can get a lease with outlined agreements, that's important. But the reality is that many folks, pay month by month, and we have families who live in hotels and motels, and they don't have any type of, really a formal tenant landlord agreement. And so I don't know if you have any additional commentary. Do you still have rights if you have lived in that location for X amount of time but don't have a lease? And what are those type of situations? Does squatting laws get into effect to that degree as well? I don't know if you have any insight to that.
Squatting, yeah, I like that. When I was in law school, I loved to read about squatting rights, because we thought that it happened all the time, but I don't think that really does. But
right.
I do strongly recommend that whenever you rent, you get a lease. A lease, probably, hopefully for a year. If you don't have a lease, then you're really at extreme risk of your landlord just deciding, for whatever reason, that they want you to leave. And under Florida law, if you don't have a lease, you're considered for the most part to be a month-to-month tenant. And under Florida law, a landlord can terminate your right to stay in the property by giving you 15 days written notice prior to the end of every particular month. So you're at risk, and your landlord could just want to rent it to somebody else. I hate to say it, your landlord doesn't like the color of your hair, or the way you spoke to them one day because you were loud or you weren't considerate. And your landlord, when you don't have a lease, can ask you to leave at a moment's notice. And most people say, how can I move in 15 days? I agree with you, but that's the law in Florida. So I would strongly recommend a lease. For the folks that live in hotels and motels, there's a different law that applies to them. But at some point, they've lived there for long enough that now it's considered to be their residence. Typically, if you have an efficiency, you might want to get your driver's license changed and mail changed to that address. And then if that's the case, then you transition from living in a hotel motel to living like in an apartment complex, and the laws that apply to apartment complexes then would also apply to you at a hotel motel kind of arrangement. So we see that a lot. A lot of folks in the last year or two, extended stay Americas and places like that, but they've been there for a while. And interestingly enough, the attorneys who represent those entities do know that the Landlord Tenant Act applies and they have to go through a regular eviction as opposed to just simply locking the door and having somebody removed by the sheriff. So they are getting better about that.
Right.
So, but month-to-month tenancies or having no lease, I know a lot of people emotionally don't like a lease because they feel committed to the lease then. But from a housing point of view, you must certainly want a long-term lease so that your landlord can't change the landlord's mind, and or raise your rent whenever your landlord wants to.
Right.
So a lease will
Right.
protect you. Yeah, a lease will
Right.
protect you. Yep.
Really great point. Another relatable question: are there different rules for HUD housing residents compared to regular housing residents? And my initial response is usually yes, because
Yes.
HUD has to be regulated from the federal government. You know, any type of market rate housing compared to subsidized is going to have some sort of different standards when it comes to the increase of rent. But you can still be evicted in a HUD environment. I'm sure there might be maybe some more protections, but do you have any insight to the differences, if any?
Yeah, so there are differences because that's federal regulations. There is another legal aid in Orange County. It's called Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. So if you have HUD housing, Section 8 voucher or anything related to that, you would want to call Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida, because there are different federal regulations that apply to evictions. But in the end, it's the same eviction process. We still follow the eviction under Florida law. It's just that there may be some greater protections because it's a federal housing environment instead of a private or state housing environment. But it still applies. You can still be evicted. Same rules will apply.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer, Mike.
Yep.
So earlier this year, it's hard to believe it's almost the end of this year, but earlier this year, we hosted a really great conversation that was focused on housing discrimination. And we also know that especially folks who are returning citizens, they have been experiencing some of the most hardships in acquiring housing because their criminal background is leading to a discriminatory practice. Now, Orange County is actually right now pursuing a rental, basically it's a very modest tenants bill of rights, but it's focused on discriminatory practices and trying to prohibit discrimination on a few different levels, but also when it comes to type of payment. So as long as it's a lawful form of payment, you can't discriminate against that tenant. So thinking about SSI, thinking about maybe another rental assistance program. So could you just speak more to maybe in your 22 years of experience, like, you know, what has been your exposure to issues of discrimination when it comes to tenant issues, and you know, any advice you would offer to folks who might feel like they are experiencing discrimination?
You know, it's a good question. You know, our Orange County is pretty diverse, you know, and so I think from that point of view, that's pretty good. I mean, there is discrimination. There's no doubt about that. And I know some areas in Orange County that have profound problems when it comes to that. But I think overall, I think, I don't know that for me, I haven't seen as much discrimination as other people say exists. And so I know it exists. And if it does, then you certainly need to call the county or the city of Orlando, and they have departments that are set up to try to root out this evilness, which is an evilness. There shouldn't be any discrimination in our community. Obviously there is, because people are people. And I do know some areas where I have targeted discrimination, and there are private organizations that will go out and actually attempt to prove that there is discrimination based on race or other issues. So we don't handle as much discrimination issues because we refer them to the experts in the community that are able to handle those particular things. But the nice part is, now I've been in other counties. Well, that's a whole different story. But the beauty of Orange County, in my opinion, is we are a diverse community. And so in theory, we should have less, even though we probably have a lot because we're a huge county, right? We have over 1 million people. So we're going to have a lot of instances, but that may not actually be a lot when we talk about more than 1 million people.
Right,
But
right.
we refer them out. If we believe that there's discrimination, we'll refer them out to appropriate organizations for more specialized assistance.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're going to transition soon, Mike, to talk a little bit more about just the rental assistance program here in Orange County. But before I let you go, when we close with those points, I'm curious if you have any other advice or feedback for tenants to consider, and if you could also just offer legal aid's contact information, that would be fantastic. And then we'll bid you farewell, and I'll wrap up with a few quick reminders for folks who might be thinking about applying for rental assistance in the Orange County area.
I think the easiest way to get in contact with us, just call us, which is 407-841-8310, or Google us, Legal Aid Orlando. Don't get confused, because if you put in Orange County, it might send you to California because there's an Orange County, California.
Right.
If I can I take a couple of minutes? Like I have like my top 10 things that I want to just tell people.
Please do. And actually, I actually have one more question for you too.
Sure.
So,
sure.
But go ahead and
let's go ahead. Ask your question.
Well, I wanted to ask if you could also review basically, I already talked about one of the ordinances in Orange County that is being workshopped right now, but we also know that earlier in the fall, the county went through a notification type of ordinance for rent increases. And we have gotten some questions from folks who are curious about breaking their lease early if they know rent increase is coming, for example, and are they allowed to do that? So maybe just kind of speak to, rent increases, because I think candidly, that's been one of the more common issues we've seen, is that a person can afford rent right now, but then they get a new lease and it's dramatically more, and now they just don't know what to do. So maybe you can comment on some of that too.
All right, yeah, those are good questions. So we do not permit, under Florida law, a person to terminate their lease just because they want to. So a lease is a contract. You agree to it for, let's say, 12 months. And so you cannot terminate it. There are some exceptions if you have substandard housing conditions and your landlord doesn't fix. But overall, a lease is a lease, and you're stuck through the end of your lease. Now, if you're not happy with what your landlord's told you about a rent increase, that's your hint that it's time for you to start looking for another place. Now, there is a new ordinance in Orlando that I think I passed in late July or early August in Orange County that requires, if you do not have a lease, your landlord's now required to give you 60 days notice that your lease or your tenancy, your right to stay, is going to be terminated. So if you have a lease that has an end date, the new ordinance does not apply to you, because your lease has the end date, and you should have known a year ago, for example, that your lease ended, let's say, January 31st, 2023. But if you don't have a lease, then Orange County, the commissioners in Orange County, pass an ordinance that requires your landlord to give you 60 days notice that you're going to have to leave. Now, we don't know if that's really valid or legal yet. I'm sure it's going to be challenged in court, but that's a fairly new law. So if you don't have a lease, your landlord's required to give you 60-day notice that you have to leave. To compare, Florida law only allows you to have 15 days notice. So that's why the county commissioners changed it. They wanted to give tenants who don't have leases more time to move. Okay. Now, if there's a rent increase of more than 5%, the new Orange County ordinance also requires 60-day notice of your rent increase. So now, in theory, landlords are going to start to provide their tenants with notice, with 60 days advance notice, that they're getting a rent increase. If you are okay with the rent increase, then you accept it, you sign a new lease. If you're not okay with that rent increase, then you're going to have to move out at the end of that 60-day time period. So again, these things are all brand new. They change significantly Florida law. We just don't know whether or not they're going to be valid. I'm sure that people are going to challenge it along the way. But the commissioners did a good job of changing the law, or at least trying to change the law to give tenants a little bit more time to stay in the property, because we need more time. You can't find another place quickly in Orange County anymore. The rents are sky high and there's no inventory. So the ordinance is an attempt to try to give people more time, a little bit more heads up about what they should do. Does that make sense?
Totally. And just, just to add to that, your point is well taken about just the timeline to find a new place. It is very difficult. The response of, go move is so hard, because
terrible.
Moving is expensive. Finding another place that you can afford is close to impossible, especially if, you work in Orange County. And, I've had in the past constituents tell me I'm thinking of moving out of the county, even though I work in this county. And so then they're going to have additional gas costs, right, to drive to work. And so we're just pushing people away from their neighborhoods. And it's not sustainable, and it further erodes the diversity that we really celebrate in especially in Orange County.
Right.
In particular, our service workers, some of our service workers, they have to drive miles to get to work because they can't afford to live near their employer. And that's such a disservice to the work they do in generating revenue for our community, for the state of Florida, and so forth. So that's such an important point.
I mean, I have a friend who called me and got a $400 a month increase in their rent, and she just absolutely is crying. She goes, how in the world can I afford this? How can I save money to retire?
Right.
And I'm like, yes, I understand that. So these are tragic things that are occurring in our community, and as you said, making it difficult for people to live and prosper.
Yeah. And your point too, it impacts every generation. So I think there's an assumption that we're just talking about younger people, or we're talking about, young families, or single individuals that are, able-bodied. Not the case. Like, this in particular really impacts folks on fixed incomes, who tend to be our elders and those who are close to retirement age. So they don't have the ability to tap into benefits yet. And so, yeah, like, that is such an important point. This impacts every person. It's not a specific category of individual. It's really everyone.
It's broad. Yes.
Yeah.
I did have my points, but I think if you wanted to ask questions, maybe
I feel like we've already grabbed a lot of questions that have come in, and we did have some additional pre-submitted questions that I'm looking at them right now. I think we uplifted most of them. The one that we haven't is around, is there any agency that offers relocation assistance? Again, we kind of alluded to the fact that moving is really expensive. Here in Orange County, I have not come across any agency that helps with moving. But I will encourage you to contact a state representative. We've helped people move just with our volunteer network. So if you are in that type of a situation, I just encourage you to, contact us, and we'll do our best to identify. Perhaps there can be a company that will in-kind a service. Sometimes we can find companies that are generous in that way. But do let us know, if you're in that situation, if you have a place to move to, but just not the means to move. And another question too, around just why can't we build more affordable housing in Florida, which, really is one of the solutions here, is to, increase supply. And I would argue also look towards density and infill versus building out, like also building in our communities. So folks are closer to transit options and so forth. And, part of the response is that the state legislature has defunded affordable housing trust fund dollars for the last 2 decades almost. And those were dollars that were supposed to go to building more affordable apartments. And so we are behind, and it's very difficult to catch up when not only are the dollars not always there, but now we have labor shortages and supply shortages. So there's been a lot of good research on just the country as a whole is unable to meet the demand of housing in the speed we should because of some of these other supply chain and labor issues. But I will say that it's a priority for us to address those problems. And of course, we advocate for fully funding the Affordable Housing Trust Funds every session. And the legislature is going to be looking at things like inclusionary zoning this session alongside our local government. So I'm very hopeful that we'll at least have some housing policy coming out of legislature that is not detrimental. And, we'll be the watchdogs to help make sure that we have some good, decent housing policy coming out of next session. But that does not begin till March of 2023. And any new policy would not be implemented till July 1st of 2023. And so that's why we're having this conversation now. The need is now, and it is urgent. It is immediate. And unfortunately, lawmakers had dragged their feet for a very long time, which is why yesterday I was at the Orange County Board of Commission meeting to talk about tenants' rights, because please remember that local government can also play a role. And that's why we have to put pressure to our federal partners, to our state partners, and to cities and counties. And so with that, Mike, I want to toss it to you to kind of go over your final list. And then I'll close off with some really quick reminders about applying for rental assistance.
All right. Well, you're awesome, by the way.
Thank you.
I just have like my top things that I tell people, like renter. So don't pay in cash, things like that. Get a receipt. If you're paying in cash, it means bad things on your landlord's point of view, in my opinion. It means they're doing something they're not supposed to be. And a lot of landlords will deny that you paid your rent. So get a receipt, things like that. A lot of clients today, because of the housing crisis, they're having friends or family move in with them. They're now unauthorized guests. That's illegal. You're breaking or breaching your lease. Your landlord can evict you because you have somebody that moves in. The more typical example is when Puerto Rico had the hurricane, right, a couple of years ago. And so many people came over to Orlando and they were being evicted. Well, I have my family from Puerto Rico. Yes, we know, but you're unauthorized and we're going to evict you for that. So you can't have that. So many people, and I want to reiterate, there aren't any excuses under Florida law for non-payment of rent. So I know you think that there's a reason or an excuse that makes it okay. There aren't any reasons or excuses. And I know that's hard to deal with, but I need you to understand that as a lawyer, because there's nothing I can do. And people pour out their hearts. But in the end, the judge can't do anything about it. And I can't do anything about it because it's all about Florida law. We did talk about evictions can never be removed. That's going to profoundly impact your ability to find other housing in the future. Security deposits. Everyone asks, when am I getting my security deposit back? Under Florida law, your landlord has 30 days after you move out to give you a letter that tells you what they're doing with your security deposit. So if you think that you're going to get your security deposit back right away, that's not going to happen. Your landlord gets to do or wait 30 days to give you a letter, tell you why they're retaining some or all of it. If you don't like it, you've got to send them a letter back in 15 days. And then if your landlord doesn't give you the money back, you have to file a lawsuit against your landlord. So are you going to get your security deposit back? Probably not. Or if you do, not anytime soon. All right. So just things like that I wanted to tell you. It requires you to be a little bit more knowledgeable and proactive, learn more about the law so that you know in advance about what things are, rather than coming to somebody else like me later on and being surprised about what the law might be. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for your incredible time and expertise and your passion for consumers. It is something that I share in my heart deeply. And so I'm so grateful for your advocacy and for your leadership, because we got to center our policy and our activism and our professions on amplifying those everyday folks, amplifying folks who are just trying to get by. And no matter how hard they work, they don't get a fair shake. And we're trying to help make sure that everyone gets a fair shake. So I really appreciate you taking the time and the fact that you even came out of retirement to do this. Like, you didn't have to do that. So thank you for your deep commitment and passion. And I look forward to hopefully, continuing to work alongside you and maybe get to meet you in person one day too. So I'm so grateful for your advocacy, and we'll make sure for folks that we drop legal aid's information in the chat. And Mike, I know it's 11 o'clock, so you're welcome to hop off. I'm going to quickly review the ERAP 2 program for our listeners. Okay. But I just want to say a final thank you to you, and I hope you have a beautiful holiday season.
Thank you, you too. And your constituents are lucky to have you. That's
thank you. I appreciate you.
They are very lucky.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye now.
All right, everyone. So before we wrap up, I do want to just review the Orange County Emergency Rental Assistance Program 2, or ERAP 2. So y'all probably remember that this is a federally funded program. It's the second federally funded program that Orange County has had for rental assistance. As a reminder, eligibility for this program is limited to residents in the county that do not live in the city of Orlando. And so again, the city of Orlando has been essentially carved out of eligibility for this program. The Orlando Sentinel reported this week that only about $1 million has been distributed thus far, and $13 million still remains. And the county was citing duplicate and ineligible applications as a major cost for the delay. So I do want to encourage folks to not apply more than once. And we'll continue to push the county on expediency on our end as well. With that said, we know that there are so many people who are waiting and they don't have the time to wait. So we do want to share some do's and don'ts with the application process. So do complete all information on the application. Do submit all documents. Make sure you include all household members in the household tab. And then watch for emails from Orange County and check your spam folder as well. Application don'ts. Do not submit more than one application. It does not speed things up for you. Check your address in Orange County's webpage to make sure you are eligible. Again, City of Orlando residents unfortunately are not eligible. And then call 311. Don't call 311 and ask for emergency rental assistance if you receive an eviction notice from the court. This is not a late notice from your landlord. If it comes from the courts, it'll have a case number similar to something like 2022-CC- and then digits. And so the county is asking that, if you receive an eviction notice from the court, you need to respond to the court. That's not a late notice. That is an actual eviction. And so we have to, again, contact legal aid, go through the process of responding to the court. That is, knowing the difference between a late notice and a court order is very, very important. And with that said, as I noted already, even through our legislative office, getting a court order eviction as the document you send us and the reason for assistance, even for us, it's very hard for us to find resources to address that situation in the time frame that we have. We just heard from Mike of just how fast an eviction can move. And so that's why we really, really encourage you to be proactive. If you know you're going to fall behind in rent, talk to your landlord, see if grace can be given, see if partial payment plans can be made. Contact 211 to see what alternative options for one-time financial assistance might be available to you. And of course, feel free to contact our office as well. For the more time we have, and the better able we are to tap into community resources and see what is out there to provide assistance. And so with that said, I so appreciate y'all's time and attention. Thanks so much for being part of this conversation. We had some technical issues, unfortunately, on the Facebook live stream. So this is now streaming on YouTube, but we're going to be uploading this entire recording on our Facebook page as soon as it's available. So definitely look forward to that. We want to share this link to your networks. And again, much gratitude to Legal Aid Society of Orange County, Bar Association, to Lisa of Total Captions, to our team of interns. Eduardo has been here helping to drop links in the chat. And of course, Cheyenne for managing the back end and the tech problems. We appreciate y'all so much. And please continue to keep in touch with us, and we'll always be here to support folks however we can. So have a beautiful day, and we'll talk soon.